Correct me if I'm wrong. So, okay, I think of it as almost like three pillars, and this maybe runs through the 90s through the present. So there's this broad, we gave us a sense of the history of the corruption and the sort of reciprocal and parasitic relationships that have been established by the PRI. But then it definitely seems that even by those historic standards, that the present PRI administration is just almost like there's it's just so naked and so relentless, right? So there and even like the different steps, like we can recognize, like as an example, like South Africa. Okay, I don't think that Cyril Ramaphosa is not going to be a left progressive leader, most likely, who really does some of the things that I would think that South Africa needs, to really deal with things like structural inequality, and it will be a very corporate-friendly government. But that is different than just like rampant robbery under Jacob Zuma.
Yeah.
So I guess that's like, okay, so going back to the 90s, we have pre-politicians embraced NAFTA. They embraced a lot of neoliberal policies, which were, destructive of the working class and agricultural sector, right? And then that's one thread, is this kind of dealing with neoliberalism. And there's dealing with the corruption and the democracy deficit. And then it seems like the legacy, not of Vicente Fox, but of his successor, was this incredible amping up of the drug war. And now we have, seriously militarized drug cartels. And obviously, I get that people have an allergy to talking too much about the cartels and the drug business because they don't want to reduce Mexico to that, but at the same time to not acknowledge that they aren't, serious players and realities in Mexican security and politics is delusional. So it's like corruption, neoliberalism, and cartels. I think you kind of talked about the democracy and corruption thing. And then what about those other two kind of nexus of the neoliberal and the cartel?
Yeah, you really hit the nail on the head there. Those are the three kind of big problems facing Mexico. With regard to the neoliberalism, one of the things that has made, again, kind of scrambled the understanding is that we now have a president here in the United States who has said that he's totally willing to withdraw from NAFTA, right? So the left position previously, the position with which López Obrador might have, sort of proved his left credentials, was the idea that, Mexico was better off before NAFTA and could leave NAFTA. Now, all of a sudden, that's Trump's position, right? And so the politics of that become much more complicated. López Obrador has said that he wants to address a number of those things. Early in his campaign, he was, for instance, very against this set of kind of deepening neoliberal reforms that Enrique Peña Nieto has put into place, opening, for instance, very importantly, the national oil company to investment by private oil companies from the United States and elsewhere from the UK. So López Obrador initially was very against this, talked about canceling those contracts, and in the last few months, he has sort of moderated that position. He has said, we won't cancel any contracts that actually exist. We probably won't draw up any new ones. We're going to review them and make sure that they're good for the nation. He wants to, for instance, give more subsidies to people in rural areas, and he uses the United States as an example of that. Agricultural subsidies are massive here, and American farmers and business. He said there's no reason that Mexico shouldn't be doing that as well, right? But he doesn't want to raise taxes to be able to fund that. On the question of sort of neoliberalism and what his economic policies will be, I think there's a kind of mixed bag there. And he's assembled a coalition of people in what he has proposed as his cabinet who have differing ideas about that. So that's one that, will sort of will remain to be seen if López Obrador is elected, sort of how the coalition that he's put together on economic issues will actually work to change economic policy in Mexico. With regard to the drug war, that is obviously another massively important piece of the puzzle. And that is one where Mexico can't really act alone, right? So there are a couple of things that are really important here. The first is that one of Enrique Peña Nieto's kind of parting gifts for the Mexican state is he recently saw through the passage of this very draconian law of internal security that basically the way that the military has been being used in the drug war, deployed in the streets as a police force since 2007, since the administration of Felipe Calderón, was illegal. In much the same way that it's illegal here, with the military is supposed to be used for things outside of the country. The police are supposed to be domestic. So the use of the military in policing the drug war since 2007 has been more or less not sanctioned by Mexican law. And so they wrote a law to sanction it. They wrote a law that basically will keep the military in the streets as the sort of police force indefinitely. And this is something that even high-level leaders in the military have questioned in Mexico. But what this means is that there is now a kind of legal mechanism for the military to continue being the means through which the Mexican state addresses the drug war. And we know that that has led to, obviously, you put the military in the streets, you get militarization. And so that's where more than 100,000 people have died. We have something approaching 30,000 forced disappearances in Mexico. So the use of the military, this law of internal security, is something that is really dangerous and difficult. There are parts of Mexico where the drug war violence is incredibly high, and especially in places where new kind of upstart cartels, there's one called Jalisco New Generation, that are battling for turf from the cartels that have been kind of decapitated by the U.S.-led strategy. So when El Chapo Guzman went to prison, the Sinaloa cartel lost its main leader, and some of its subordinates began sort of fighting for power, and then other cartels began fighting with them. So those power struggles have been incredibly devastating in particular regions of Mexico, and that question of security is something that's really important. López Obrador has given some indications of how he wants to address that. He has floated the idea that there might be a kind of amnesty program, that if people come forward and agree to sort of lay down their weapons, that they might be pardoned. That obviously got him hammered from the PRI and the PAN candidates. And so that question, I think, is a really difficult one, because it's one where obviously the United States is supplying the guns, it's supplying the money, and it is the market for the drugs. And so with under a U.S.-led security strategy where this push towards militarization continues, the Mexican government is really constrained in what it can do and what it decides it wants to do. So that's one where having Trump in office, if López Obrador wins with Trump in office and his kind of bellicose anti-Mexican stance, with regard to Mexico being the kind of purveyor of the drugs, as though the United States isn't the market, that is going to create a really difficult situation for whoever takes the presidency, AMLO or otherwise.
Yeah, we're totally hopeless. I mean, they just bring it. What are we going to do?